afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our discussion on mobilizing finance for electric two and three-wheelers. My name is Jen Oh. I'm the practice manager for South Asia Transport of the World Bank. I'm delighted to be moderating the session. We had very interesting, engaging discussion on the e-bus transition yesterday. And I'm very excited to talk about this another very exciting vehicle segment that is the two three-wheelers that are at the center of motorization in the developing world. In cities across the world, from Mumbai, Jakarta to Nairobi, these are the vehicles that navigate the traffic and really enabling the countless individuals to commute, access essential services, and transport goods. And these are the key, they play a key role in urban mobility, providing affordable and efficient mobility solution. The question that we are exploring today is how can we make sure that we use the cleanest form of energy for this critical vehicle segment? And there's no other group that I would like to invite to better suited to discuss this topic than the distinguished speakers we have today. We will start with Clay Stranger, Managing Director at the Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, who leads the Carbon-Free Transportation Program and co-leads the India program. We'll also have Mr. Raman, Chairman and Managing Director, Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDBI. In the panel, we'll have Mr. Gerald Olivier, a lead transport specialist of the World Bank, who is leading the World Bank's e-mobility program in India. I should invite you to the stage. Clay, maybe you can come in at the end of the introduction. Sorry, and we didn't choreograph it properly. And Ms. Tan Ha, Manager of the RMI's Southeast Asia Energy Program. Mr. Chen Chen, Director of Transport, covering wide geography of Central and West Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific at the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Aditya Ramji, Director of India Zero Emission Vehicle Research Center, Institute of Transportation Studies, University of California, Davis. Welcome to all of you. I'm delighted to have your presence representing the broad stakeholders from policymakers, philanthropy, research communities, and development financiers. And a lot is happening in the sector, right? It's a very vibrant sector. And you see the startups offering very cool design electric scooters with funky names and battery swapping technologies. And indeed, in many cities, many cities, especially in Asia, are seeing the growing number of electric two, three-wheelers. And yet, I want to remind you that only about 5% of the total, around almost 600 million two, three-wheelers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are electric today. So how do we get from here and to where we have mainstreamed electric vehicles? Spoiler alert, requires financing solutions, of course, but it also requires other things like policies and investments and collaboration and partnership as well. So I'll turn to our panel to speak to those essential ingredients of the transition. And also, we talk about these examples of early success today, including India and Southeast Asia. I also request our panel to think about how we can take this forward and scale in other parts of the world. With that, finally, I'd like to invite Clay to the podium for his keynote presentation. You have 8 minutes to set the stage for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Clay Stranger. I'm a managing director with Rocky Mountain Institute, and want to do a little bit of scene setting here before handing it over to these distinguished practitioners and experts. When we look at electrification of two and three-wheelers globally, we see it as both a climate imperative and also an equity imperative. Two and three-wheelers deliver billions of passenger kilometers every single day. The vehicles are used for cargo applications, for passenger applications, sometimes interchangeably in between rides. And despite several factors that are really increasing the market, as we just heard, it is still just a few percent of global on-road vehicles of the total stock. A persistent bottleneck for the adoption of this segment or the electrification of this segment is the high cost of financing for 2- and 3-wheelers. And when we compare that specifically to the internal combustion engine vehicle counterparts and the rates at which they're being financed. When we look across the entire energy transition, I can think of very few other subsectors other than 2- and 3-wheelers where we could actually achieve full, meaningful scale by the end of this decade. Think about renewables, think about heavy transport, think about even passenger cars. There is an opportunity before us to actually push for 100% or close to it of this segment by 2030, but that is not at all a given, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. Getting there or getting close to there would have enormous direct benefits to livelihoods, to air pollution, to climate, and also to confidence building and momentum building for some of the harder sectors that need to move. These higher interest rates that electric 2- and 3-wheelers are subject to are eroding, in some cases, the economic viability of the unit of these vehicles themselves. You look at very low cost and competitive total cost of ownership advantage for 2- and 3-wheelers, subjected to an unfairly high interest rate in some cases, basically offsets much of the savings that should be staying in the pockets of, in some cases, new to credit customers. So this is very much a livelihood issue, as much as it is a climate or air quality issue. When we look across sort of the ecosystem level approach that needs to be taken, affordable finance alone won't electrify the full segment. And there's 3 components that we see as essential to be arranged in some formula, varying place by place, but that are important precursors or preconditions. And the first of those is the presence of supportive policies. Those can take many different forms, including demand or supply side facing policies, tailpipe regulations, tax policies, other forms of incentives or subsidy. The second is a flourishing product market. And this can mean either manufacturing or assembly within a country, or semi-liberalized or available importation of the vehicles themselves. This is really important because you want a competitive market. We want to see multiple competitive products. This can lower costs. It can also press for price convergence in a way that you don't get when you just have 1 or 2 products on the market. And the third is the presence of local financial institutions willing to lend to electric 2- and 3-wheelers in general. Once some combination of those pieces is in place, then very quickly the availability or lack thereof of affordable finance becomes one of the most persistent barriers that is kind of like capping or stopping progress from moving further and faster to scale. And so, as I mentioned, despite the favorable total cost of ownership economics and advantage that electric 2- and 3-wheelers have, these EV assets face heightened perceived risk across several fronts, including the product performance, operational efficiency, repossession risk, and the residual value when compared to internal combustion engine counterparts. And when you multiply that perceived asset risk with the perceived borrower risk, it sends exactly the opposite signal that we want to, which is interest rates that in some cases make the vehicles 5 to 13% more expensive than their internal combustion engine counterpart. Totally the opposite signal than what we're trying to send. So what exactly can we do to try to shift this dynamic? There's a 3-pronged approach that's been outlined by some of the team present here today, which we see as highly scalable and replicable and localizable. And the first prong or component to this approach is concessional finance, to provide capital with terms that may not be typically available in commercial markets. And the second is a portfolio of risk reduction measures that reduce or transfer risks between market actors to instill confidence in the sector. These can include some commonly applied measures in other sectors and some that are specifically tailored to the 2- and 3-wheeler space. The third is the deployment of very specific business models that reallocate financial risk, mobilize investment by conducting business in a manner that equitably shares risk amongst financiers, fleet operators, OEMs, and end consumers. Leasing is a simple example of this type of business model that distributes the initial capital cost predictably and evenly over time. So getting this right has very significant financial implications for new-to-credit customers and for end borrowers. And in the case of electric cargo three-wheelers in India, for example, de-risking measures can save more than $250 in avoided interest payments over the duration of the loan. This is capital that stays in the pocket of the driver, the operator, or the borrower, and has a huge and significant implication on livelihood. And so at the unit of the loan, $250 of savings is very significant. Multiplied sector-wide, and assuming, I think this is the lower box there, that assuming 60% adoption by 2030 of electric cargo two and three-wheelers in India, this could save almost $270 million of interest payments that stay with the drivers, with the borrower, and in local communities. So to reduce and manage the risk, the lending risk associated with electric two and three-wheelers, it's really clear to us that stakeholders within the ecosystem need to work collectively to identify how financial instruments, risk reduction measures, strategic business models can mobilize finance and better manage the market risks. This approach is highly scalable and very localizable. It necessitates that financiers and market participants deploy specific financial instruments and risk reduction measures, measure those results, make alterations or adjustments where necessary based on the financial need and the state of market maturity. And the combination of levers can create a positive ambition loop where you actually see greater uptake, more exposure to the technology, building confidence, reducing risk, and therefore interest rates that in turn deploys more of the technology and further boosts confidence, hopefully in a positive flywheel that really sets this thing off in the exponential curve that we think it can grow on. So by working together, stakeholders can pool resources, share knowledge, develop joint strategies, create a more resilient and conducive environment for this market. And it's reassuring to know that we have some of the components in place. We believe we know what needs to happen in a sense, and now it really is about articulating that, actualizing it, animating it. And I really look forward to working with many of you to realize the potential. So thank you so much for your kind attention. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clay, for this excellent framing. Now I'll turn to Mr. Raman, who I heard figured all out, all these problems, how to solve, and then will share with us the secret recipe that CP has put together and has a present for all of us.
Thank you so much. And I think the secret recipe is called hard work, which I think all of us have put in. But at the outset, I think we must acknowledge the fact that the Niti Aayog in India, which I think we have the member Niti Aayog sitting right here, has in a way been the guiding force to drive us all as participants into the space of EV. So there's been a lot of work both at the technology level as well as the distribution level. And I think given the initial experiments that were tried out, seemingly successful, and therefore we sort of have all plunged into this head first. So I think at the outset, it's been an absolutely amazing partnership with the World Bank. So what we really did was we took on the stakeholders right from the consumers, which is really both, say, the delivery boys who are, now proliferating in India. They deliver the last mile. We have the cargo three-wheelers, which actually outnumber all cargo delivery in the country, because again, it's sort of more the last mile delivery. And of course, more recently, we're now talking about the e-bus and the e-truck. But what we have really done is for that two-wheeler and three-wheeler space, we invited the OEMs, we invited what is known as the financiers, which is more the non-bank financial companies rather than the banks, because those are the people who are really providing finance to the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segment. We've then got the aggregators, and that I think is really a new segment that's emerged. What do they really do? They will have a fleet, so it's really the fleet operators, and they would end up providing on a lease basis the two-wheeler to a particular driver. And that again has led to a huge de-risking of the fact that there is no need for an upfront large capital expenditure. And then we've run this across in several locations of the country. So I think the World Bank team and the SIDBI team met with, I think, over 1,000 such stakeholders. And this is really, I think, the secret sauce that you're talking about, because once you've got the views of all the persons who are interested in this product, we've managed to work out different models for different subsegments. So if I were to just give an example, the delivery boys subsegment, which is really the last mile two-wheeler delivery, we found that they're very happy using the two-wheelers which are at 25 kilometers per hour, because it's not necessary that they go in and sort of do that last mile dash. Now, this has again led to a rethinking of how that particular vehicle, which has got a speed constraint of 25 kilometers an hour, is sizably cheaper than the other two-wheeler EV. So, this is really where I think the understanding of the subject matter with the people who actually use it, with the people who are going to sort of bring in the maintenance and the leasing and the maintenance. This is where I think we've understood large parts of the game. And just a last point on the maintenance aspect. And this is something which, again, as we move ahead and we evolve in the process of, so, the word evolve, you'll hear probably many times over in this meeting. What is happening now is that the battery itself tends to get discarded slightly before its actual life gets over. So we end up, at a 20% degradation, we put aside the battery and say that we need a new one. Now, there are people in India who've been working in this space who have got the ability to actually open up the battery and replace those 20% cells which have degraded. And you've now got a battery which is nearly back to 100% capacity. Now, this is causing the life of the battery to, I wouldn't say double, but probably, close to doubling the life of the battery. This causes the total cost of ownership to come down. So I think we are all on the right track. We are looking at multiple ways, and it's therefore not just the finance, but it's also a lot of, gray cells working on actual technology. And amazingly, this ability to maintain a battery is somewhere equivalent to what has been done in the aerospace, in the airline industry for years, where you have engines on lease and the engines are then maintained on a MRO basis. So that's really where I think we are looking forward to. And I think the biggest point that I'd like to make is that the commitment of 30 by 30 is still a distant dream. So the numbers that we're looking at, and therefore I think it's a huge business opportunity. So all of you kindly come to India and set up, two-wheeler and three-wheeler factories, because we are looking at 90 million EVs that we need on the road. And today, I think the count is about 5 million. So there's a massive opportunity. Thank you. So, sir, could I just invite you on the stage if you can just take a moment and help us launch the report? Thank you. Please, I think all the contributors, we have SIDBI, we have the RMI, we have Niti Aayog. So I think the digital version is there on the it's something that we can, oh, it's right there. Right, great. It's a QR code, so it's right there. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
So many congratulations on launching this guide that lays out how some of these risks that Clay talked about can be addressed, and including practical solutions that addresses the market challenges. So I'm very sure that this will benefit a broad audience. So thank you for that. Let me turn to Gerald, who's been, a longtime partner of RMI, SIDBI, and other partners in India pushing this agenda forward. Please tell us a little bit on this overall landscape of 2-3-wheelers in India. And when we were, thinking to implement these specific mechanisms to reduce risks associated in this market, also explain to us a little bit how the concessional capital providers, including multilaterals and philanthropic entities, can help mobilizing additional private capital and really help take this market off the ground.
Thank you very much, Jen, and really delighted to be with all of you today, and great to see also Niti Aayog, who has been a launcher of the initiative, also joined the event. One of the first point that for me was very striking when starting the conversation was that the government of India was very clear as to priority was given to e-buses, 2-wheeler and 3-wheelers very, very early on in their policies, which is not necessarily something you expect, firsthand. But then when you start looking at the numbers, you can see the numbers you were mentioning. In Asia, around the world, 570 million 2-3-wheelers, but actually 86% of it is in Asia, right? So Asia has a very, very, very strong base to start with. And what is interesting is that every year, Asia is adding 60 million 2-3-wheeler to the market. And the question is, what kind of 2-3-wheelers will be added? Right, so that was kind of the starting point for the conversation. How do we ensure that you don't lock in, 2-3 tons per new vehicle being added to the fleet by looking at the parameters that prevents the rapid adoption of those 2- and 3-wheelers, electric 2- and 3-wheelers. We then looked at what was happening in the market in terms of the market overall. And very quickly, you realize, as was pointed by both Clay and Mr. Raman, that it's a very diversified market: freight, passenger, large 3-wheelers, small 3-wheelers, fast speed, low speed, etc. And each of them has a very different profile in terms of its economics and its finance. So those, for example, a 2-wheeler that is used more than 15,000 kilometers per annum breaks even in India today on a cost economics perspective, a TCO perspective. So it means that all the fleet users really have a huge advantage. But even if you're using a 3-wheeler that is in a fleet versus you're an individual driver who bought this 3-wheeler, the profile remains quite different. And likewise, the banks and the non-banking finance corporations supporting the markets are very, very, different depending on the market segment you look at. Why does it matter? Because ultimately, there cannot be a silver bullet when you look at unlocking the 2-3-wheeler market, because it really requires working with the entire ecosystem, from having ensured that the vehicle is fit and is not going to catch fire and the like, to having financing solutions that are adapted to the different types of users ultimately, and then to respect the risk preference of the bigger commercial bank that have no hesitation to provide today loans at the same rate for conventional and EVs for their salaried customer, but are very, very reluctant to do the same for the vast majority of purchasers who are not salaried or MSMEs. So as we look through that, and we looked at the cost base for lending. We quickly realized that it's a matter of three parameters. One is obviously the cost of borrowing of those entities. Second is the cost of operation, which can be quite significant because these are small ticket items. And the third one, which is really important, is what is the expected loss. Now, the expected loss varies very significantly depending on those categories. Just to give one example, if you look at the categories of electric three-wheelers, low speed that go to an individual, you will expect maybe a loss of 9%. If you go to a fleet operator that has larger vehicle and use them commercially, you will have an expected loss of 3%. So the difference is very significant, and therefore, as you move forward with the approach, one needs to think about that ecosystem. How do you create a vehicle that then can work with all these non-bank finance corporations, all these commercial banks, to either de-risk their financing or provide them access to lower cost financing? The next point is that to really move the market at scale, and Jürgen was very clear this morning, you need to gain pace. Although there has been double-digit growth in the market in India, it's nowhere near what is required to achieve the target by 2030. So the pace requires scale. The scale requires using those principles that are laid out in the report and actually bringing enough volume to move forward with enough 1, 2, 3 million vehicles so that you demonstrate the actual risk associated with them compared to the expected risk. The third point that came through that was quite relevant is that different markets are different economics, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore where to target first boils down to those economics. And we speak a lot about the adoption of along an S curve, where you're trying to accelerate the passageway so that you go to that part which is very steep, where commercial financing becomes available. So that's very relevant in the case of MSMEs, and that's where the role of a CB becomes essential. So last point I was going to mention is that reducing the costs of borrowing through blended finance is very important, but there is also an opportunity to think about the de-risking aspect as an ecosystem approach, where the service industry starts providing de-risking solutions that are addressing the aspects that are in the report, things like secondary market associated with those vehicles, things like repossession mechanisms that can lower the expected loss so that you unlock this at scale. So where does philanthropies and the like fit in? You can think of it as a number of risk buckets. Those risk buckets can be handled by different parties. Typically, the first loss can be addressed by the financial institution themselves because they are client-facing. They know well their client and they can absorb the first part. Philanthropies, I think you're working with Shell Foundation, sir, can play the second role. And then, MDBs can augment the scale altogether by providing further concessional financing and de-risking mechanism that then expand the envelope and achieve the scale we were looking for. So last, I know I said last once before, but last is that the kind of thinking as an ecosystem allows you to then say, okay, we have a platform that exists, and different philanthropies, different NGOs, different bilaterals are interested in supporting it, but don't want to recreate the entire ecosystem because it's complicated and time-consuming, etc. But they can fit right in by targeting specific segments and embedding it into those kind of platforms so that you do achieve the scale, you do achieve very targeted, measurable results that others can be then benefiting from. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this experience. I think really the key is that prioritizing within this very diverse 2-3-wheeler market and try to balance the risk appetite that can be met leveraging the existing financing instruments, and also aiming at achieving the target, the scale and the impacts. And that, the first step approach in India that has been shared here is to focus on the SMEs segments in 2-3-wheeler markets. I would like to now take you to a different geography of Southeast Asia. And Tan, it would be great if you could share with us how, is the market in Southeast Asia compared to India that we just talked about. And also, what are some of the, different types of risks and the market context that you would like to share with us, and which elements of some of these tools and mechanisms that we discussed in the case of India could be applied in the situation?
So the market for EV in Southeast Asia is very exciting, and there's a lot of potential for growth, especially in the 2- and 3-wheeler segment. I remember my first vehicle for work was an electric scooter produced in China, and I used multiple times to have to just walk with it in the rain because the battery died. Even I plug it in the office for many hours. So right now we have more than 20 different models and the performance is so much better. So that was in 2012 to 2014. And as of this year, two-wheeler vehicle sale in electric two-wheeler vehicle sale in Southeast Asia could reach 1 million unit and reach up to 15 million unit by 2030. Similar growth is also expected for the three-wheeler segment. And this growth has really been enabled by positive policy signal from the governments across several funds like EV target, consumer incentive, ban on ICE vehicle, support for domestic product market growth, as well as charging infrastructure development. So take Vietnam, for example. Vietnam is issuing a ban on fossil fuel power vehicle by 2040. And Indonesia set a very strong target for electric two-wheeler production of 2.5 million and aim to have 13 million vehicle on the road by 2030. They also provide subsidy for vehicle purchase and has a very aggressive target for producing EV battery supply chains. I think the target capacity is about 140 gigawatt hour by 2030. So this is equivalent to global EV battery capacity back in 2020. Then the Philippines, for example, is placing a lift on import tariff for EV for 5 years. And they're also issuing a roadmap for charging infrastructure development. So besides government policy that send a positive signal, there's also a really flourishing ecosystem in the EV market in the region. Lots of innovation and with front-running company that make bold investment. You probably have heard of VinFast, which is the biggest conglomerate in Vietnam that is producing the first electric vehicle domestically. So they are partnering with a delivery and ride-hailing group called Bear Group. And they also invest in them. And what they're doing is that they are signing an agreement to supplying Bear Group with their fleet of electric vehicle, both 2- and 4-wheelers. And then Bear Group also operate a digital bank that basically has exclusive policy to allow Bear's driver to buy or lease VinFast EV at very attractive prices. And Bear Group is also betting on the synergy between digital banking and ride-hailing services. So they use data like driver's income to make better credit decision. So these are some of the really exciting innovation in the market and business model that should be scaled up. However, there is a long road to get to the 2030 target. and a lot to be done to really accelerate electrification of two-wheeler in the Southeast Asia market. I think some of the risks that Clay talk about are really similar that we are observing. Currently, most of the employee at these ride sharing and delivery company who are the primary owners of electric two-wheeler are financing for these vehicles by themselves at a very high interest rate. Now we're also seeing some financial services company that are providing, installment payment options, but it's only up to like 18 months. And overall, like across Southeast Asia, the local banking sector and financial institutions are still very unaware of the potential to develop EV financing products. We see some initiative in Indonesia where generally the banking sector is embracing to develop more green financing products, and they are looking at dedicated EV products. So I think all of these measure or these formula can really be replicated in Southeast Asia. But I would say that capacity building for the local financial institution will be critical. Obviously, in Indonesia, where it's more advanced, you can start with this de-risking measure, concessional finance facility to on-lend to local bank. But in other countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, I think there's still a lot of capacity building to do to show these different financing options and models. Take what you were saying about the battery life. There's like, 10, 15 different battery with different life and performance. And those can all have impact on the financing model for the EV. And another thing that I would argue for is supporting the private sector and the disruptive models, by providing catalytic capital to really scale up this model, as well as bringing these stakeholders together to exchange like learning and share innovation idea.
Thank you, Tan, for sharing this perspective. And I think you are touching on both supply side and demand side, and complementing really clear, forward guidance in terms of the policy dimensions, and also with the measures to nurture the financial service sector and the private sector participation. Thank you for that. Let me turn to Chen, who will, take us even to the even broader geography of the world that we are thinking about. You're covering West and Central Asia and also the East Asia and the Pacific. And how does this, experiences resonate in these other parts of the world? And also, we touched on the policy dimensions. What do you see the policy environment in these other parts of the world that would create the enabling environment for scale up? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, first, it's really a great honor to sit here together with other colleagues. Very hearty congratulations to NITI Aayog, CDB, and RMI. It's really an excellent report. So I got the report a few days back with great interest. I finished it in a few hours. So ADB is part of the game. We are part of the game because when we are one of the largest, someone told me it's the largest, but let me be a bit modest. We are one of the largest financier in e-vehicle among the MDBs. So ADB has provided a $1 billion finance to e-vehicles. We have financed 750,000 e-vehicles, and out of 750, 720,000 are for e-two-wheelers and three-wheelers. We had 2 equity investment in India through our venture fund to support the manufacturing part of the e-vehicle. We also have a program in Philippines supported the rolling out of the two-wheelers, three-wheelers. So we are part of the game. We like to work very closely with other sister organizations and other development partners to further explore opportunities in this area in the context of addressing climate change. From the report, I think one very actually important fact has been pointed out is actually most of the customers for this e-vehicle, particularly e-3-wheeler and 2-wheeler, are the SME. I don't know how many of us has a finance sector background, but can we do a quick survey? If you can raise your hand, any of you have a finance sector background? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. I think we have probably less than 10 colleagues here. But this one, I think if I put me in this context, essentially this is not purely a transport issue. This is more issue about the whole ecosystem. And the finance sector is playing a major role. So ADB regularly monitors the SME status in the region of Asia and Pacific. Every year we publish a report. The latest one is last October. If you are interested, please check that out. But let me just share a few figures. In Asia and the Pacific, the micro, small, and medium enterprise accounted for an average 96.6% of all enterprise in terms of number. In terms of the workforce being employed, it's 55.8%. In terms of the contribution of MSME to the economic output, it's 28%. So it's quite substantial, and it's really a very sizable market. But this is a market which in the developing world, a lot of time we see it coincide with a relatively low level of development, a very relatively low level of the finance sector development. Many economies we are facing in Asia and Pacific, they still have a finance sector dominated by the banking sector. So the non-bank financial institute is not well developed. And the access to finance for the SME is limited to collateral-based borrowing. So how we can really de-risk this, I think we have to think from this perspective, from the perspective of a SME owner. So SME owner in the region, in Asia and Pacific, need to be empowered. I will tend to think at least two aspects. We need a lot of resource to help them, to empower them. First is about their finance literacy. So many SME owners, they can run a small business, but they don't really have adequate knowledge to really get access to finance, to negotiate with the bank, to get the best deal, so that they can get the money to finance upgrading the e-vehicle. The second one is about the climate literacy. We have a lot of SMEs, they are still at the relatively lower part of the value chain. But when we talk about the climate change, it's essentially a global public good or regional public good. How can we help them to really understand the necessity of upgrading their vehicle to electric 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers? How we can help them to really benefit from these global actions to address climate change? I think this is some missing part at this moment, how we can really help them to get there. So that's an empowerment program will be required to help them navigate the process. But the good thing is they are not the only sector or only segment of the economy need to be taken care of. They can really take advantage of the opportunity of just a transition. So the whole global discussion about the climate change has put just a transition in such an important position. So we understand the discussion is happening on the loss and damage fund, which World Bank colleagues is really leading this discussion. But on the other hand, there are a lot of opportunities to think out of the box, how we can bring this blended finance, how we can de-risk this sector. But from the transport sector, I think there is also an opportunity, or not only opportunity, there is also a huge demand to help the SME owners to actually do their part in the just transition or to benefit from them properly in this upgrading or whatever exercise for this e-vehicle update. So I think at least 3 areas we probably can focus on. First is road safety. Yeah, so you just mentioned there is a demand of 90 million two-wheelers, three-wheelers. It's a huge fleet. To put them on the road, so that will give a lot of pressure to the road safety management, to traffic management. How we can make sure they can seamlessly get there? How we can make sure the opportunity of upgrading to e-vehicle is also an opportunity of road safety campaign to help them be part of this. Yeah. Thank you. It's a reminder of time. Yeah. Yeah. The next thing is about the public transport integration. So all these two-wheelers, three-wheelers, they need to be part of the whole system so that they can benefit from the system. So the public transport, we want them to be the main transport service provider so that we can achieve the target of decarbonization. But two-wheeler, three-wheeler also has a role to provide the feeder service. How this two-wheeler, three-wheeler, when they get an e-vehicle, they can also provide a better service. They can really be connected to the public transport or mass transit system. I think this is another area. So last one I want to mention is we also need to monitor very closely the demand for these two-wheeler and three-wheelers. Usually the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, the number actually probably can be high when the economy is at a relatively low level of development. But when the economy all go to this upper middle income country or even high income country, do they still need such a large fleet? And do we need a strategy to phase out the support to the two-wheelers, three-wheelers? That's probably a bit long term, but I hope we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you. You really touched on a very comprehensive ground and actually linked the conversation we are having around rather specifically on the electrification of the two, three-wheeler segment with many different policy objectives that we want to achieve in the context of the development. And I think it's very interesting that you talk about this SME agenda, MSME agenda. And, you know, I think there is a MSME agenda is connected also the informality of the economy agenda. And I think some of the programs that, the ideas that are being implemented as part of the electrification also includes formalizing and monitoring and really help them, able to track the cost and usage of these vehicles and economic activities, and that also plays a role of bringing them in the more formal part of the economy, and that can contribute to the other objectives as well. And good point on the road safety, and also think about the role of two, three-wheelers in the broader context of the urban mobility, and their complementarity to the public transport would be a very important one. So thank you for that. We need to switch gear a little bit to think about also the supply side of it, right? And I think many of our India's success so far also is thanks to rapidly growing domestic market of producing and assembling these vehicles, right? And this, we understand that in many developing countries, also this is another co-benefit, right? It's in some countries, in many countries actually, this is part of the industrial policy of promoting the vehicle production and manufacturing. So I'll turn to Aditya. Please share with us a little bit on linking this demand side of the story. How do we reach these individuals and small businesses to rely on two, three-wheelers, and more broadly the industry base, ecosystem and supply chain, and give us the context of any additional financial challenges associated with it, and also the benefits.
Thank you. And thank you to the bank and WRI for hosting us over these 2 days. And I'm actually very glad that 2 and 3 wheelers are back center stage. I mean, I think everyone loves cars and other things much more. So generally that takes a lot of the mind space. But just to take a step back, I think why the 2 and 3 wheeler ecosystem is also so important in most of the developing country world. This is almost the 2-wheeler ecosystem, for example, is almost the first mode of personal transport access that many people go to, as opposed to getting a car. And I think that's where it takes so much more importance in being able to figure out how we can de-risk and scale up that market. Having said that, I mean, and I think Gerald already talked about the scale of the market. We're talking 70, 80 million 2-wheelers and another few million 3-wheelers across the ecosystem. And if China alone is about a 18, 19 million market, but has figured out a very strong ecosystem. If you just take that out for a second, the rest of the ecosystem is trying to grow. And we were starting to look at numbers about how different developing country markets are kind of ramping up. And just to kind of peel on your Vietnam example, right? But about a year and a half ago, someone pointed out that India was only at about 4% electric 2-wheeler market share, but Vietnam was already at 10%. Malaysia was getting close. And so we were saying, how did Vietnam get there? And at that point, they did not have any incentive program for electric 2-wheelers, no form of support for the market. And then we realized that the market was actually 90% lead acid battery 2-wheelers. Now, I'm not here to debate lithium ion versus lead acid, but the question is, there are two parts to the electrification story, right? Yes, we want electrification, but also what is the transition we desire, right? If do we want lead acid batteries, then that requires a different ecosystem, that requires a different skilling ecosystem, that requires a different value chain investment. If you want lithium ion battery ecosystems, then that requires a completely different thinking. But if you look at, and as you rightly pointed out, just taking the industrial policy narrative, and that's become so center to most of the developing countries, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, South Africa, Brazil, you name it. And all of them have their own respective automotive ecosystems. And I think there is nothing wrong in being able to find a compelling argument with industrial policy as the motivation to drive market transformation. But that also means that the lending narrative, and I think Clay talked about perception risk, and that's really right, because the perception risk for the market on the demand side is largely to do with product quality and product reliability. And those are the two parts that we are still struggling with in the 2 and 3-wheeler ecosystem globally. If we were to take a little more of a value chain approach, then I think we will be able to address a lot more of this and really be able to figure out how the market can grow. Take the example of India. Gerald talked about low-speed 2-wheelers and faster 2-wheelers. Actually, a lot of the market has been the low-speed market, but that's not your mainstream IC engine 2-wheeler buyers. These are the people who didn't have access, a lot of them who on the fringe who have come into the market, but your core market is still not moving because they're not able to find equal and substitutable quality products to be able to take that forward, right? So this is where I think the narrative on lending needs to go beyond the demand side and start looking at supply side ecosystems to be able to drive quality products in the market. That does mean that there will be greater challenges because, as you rightly pointed out, from a technology perspective, I think the 2 and 3-wheeler market is less complex. And I can say this, my last job was in the auto industry and was largely involved in being able to design a couple of these products in India, but less complex, but to all of your points, very dependent on the micro and small medium enterprises in most of these markets to be able to deliver. And they are always constrained on working capital to be able to deliver volumes of components for the ICE market and then volumes for the EV market, which is growing. So I think, so we've done this in the past. I think Sir will be able to talk about the SIDBI effort, but we did an MSME clustering approach in the past to be able to find scale within clusters to be able to then finance and facilitate the technology transition. I think we can look at some of those examples to bring into the clean transport space. The last thing I'll say is, this is not just an India or a country story, right? This is also a regional story. If you look, a lot of the 2 and 3-wheelers are made in the global south for the global south. Brazil, et cetera, makes and sends pretty much to the Latin America market. South Africa, Kenya, et cetera, are largely catering to the sub-Saharan Africa market. India, Thailand, et cetera, make and yes, do partly export to Africa, but essentially cater to a lot of the Southeast Asia market. So can we find, and all of these countries also are now investing in battery manufacturing, cell manufacturing, but these two programs are kind of running independently. how can we help get these countries to think about regional collaboration that is able to then think value chain, right? Don't just create or raw materials and battery for just general market. How can you create all this to also help transform your own market and your own market transition? So be able to deliver that ecosystem and then create that market certainty, because now you're not just creating for exports, which is low volume, but you're also now providing your own domestic market capability as scale for it to exist. And I think that's where we'll also drive innovation on cost reduction, affordability, and various other pieces. So I really think that is where, so I think the roles for ADB and World Bank to be able to bring the regional clusters together. But maybe the last thing I'll say is we need to think about maybe a regional SIDBI version to be able to actually be able to bring that level of affordable capital in the supply side to be able to drive this transition. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, great reminder that we have a really huge untapped potential and also potential for further partnership, as well as the proposal to SIDBI to expand your business. So I think we have 3 minutes. I'm going to take one burning question from the floor. Okay, please.
Thank you. Jason Meggs for The World. This is amazing that this activity is happening and so many things are suddenly coming around. We've had a very slow start to a huge global problem. You had people raise hands, who's in finance? Many of us don't know everything about finance. Can you give advice to practitioners how to help activate and engage and realize the potential of finance, maybe in creative ways, and what are the limits? Just give us an idea how to get it started wherever we are.
For one, I think we have evolved along with the World Bank, and I think that is really, I would say, the largest impact that will be felt of finance within the real world economy. So let me just put it in perspective. We've got a risk-sharing facility with the World Bank for supporting two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So the numbers are not important, but it's 125 million for a start, and I'm sure it will keep growing. But what it really can do is catalyze the banks within our systems to come forward and give a loan to a higher risk product and a higher risk segment. And, you know, it really is about the micro and the nano entities which are running the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. Many countries do not differentiate between a personal vehicle and something that's used for business, because it's all proprietorships. So, you know, there is no data that is distinguishing the two, but it is clearly a very large segment to which no bank, at least in India, no bank wants to sort of give them a loan because they're perceived as high risk. Believe me, they're not. So, you know, we are all trying our best, but I think the fact that we have a guarantee scheme, it really brings in the aspect of allowing banks to lend more freely because they know they can sort of take recourse to some, you know, a default guarantee. In fact, in this context, what's even better was in this program of Evolve, Shell Foundation came forward with a particular grant. And, you know, that's really rare in this world today. But I think what we're looking for is a first loss default. So I would really structure the finance module as a first loss default. The first loss default could even be the guarantee fee that we collect from the banks for providing that service. You then have a second loss guarantee, which is typically a Shell Foundation coming in with a 3% or whatever that might be. And then you have a larger sort of pool of capital standing behind, which honestly you do not want to use. So, you know, it is really a shadow of the World Bank coming behind and giving the strength to banks to say that, yes, there is a facility, but the less you use it, the better.
Yeah. I think the finance sector, I'm not a practitioner in finance sector. Probably my perspective is a transport sector. How do we look at the finance sector? So in the past, we heavily relied on the loan finance mechanism. we didn't really think about other financing modality adequately. So whether guarantee and equity can all play a role to further diversify the financing instrument in all this ecosystem. I think that is probably one thing. From transport sector, we also need to actively engage the finance sector to see how this overall demand for this addressing climate change, addressing the decarbonization can be fulfilled in addition to the traditional approach. So that is one area we're also closely watching.
Yeah. If I may, yes. If I may just add, fundamentally, you don't need to reinvent the world of finance. You have already commercial bank, non-bank financing corporation that will always know better than us what needs to be done for their market. What they don't have access to is the de-risking instrument or the blended finance, number one. And then on the transport side, all the things that were mentioned. How do you formalize as part of the process? How do you improve safety? How do you look at this as an opportunity to bring more women in the labor force? So all of these additional elements can come as part of it, but work with the ecosystem of financiers and create enough volume so that you can, reduce the gap between perceived and actual risk, reduce that expected loss as a result of that. And then as you do that with blended finance, then your cost of financing to the end customer drops considerably. I think that would be.
So thank you very much. I'd like to just try to summarize this very rich conversation we had in 3 sentences. So first, we must decarbonize this segment. No action is not an answer. Second, it is not a transport problem, or not just a transport problem, it is a finance problem. Third, innovations are happening by the risk takers we have in this room. And finally, there will be high returns to the risk takers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, that's great.